Thank you for joining us. My name is Patrick Doherty. I'm the Deputy Director of the American Strategy Program here at the New America Foundation. Thank you for joining us. I hope it's not raining too much out there. We've got a great event today. We imposed the title on Imran, Defeating the Taliban, What is Pakistan's Strategy? We're just starting to get into this conversation in the back room, and I assure you it's going to be a great conversation. We're in a situation where the United States has a strategy, but it doesn't have the resources really in place to affect that strategy. And there's a big question as to whether it's the right strategy for Afghanistan and Pakistan. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're in this strategic pickle, and we all know, I think, the outlines of the situation. The United States is heavily involved, has a heavy military presence in Afghanistan, but the challenge of the Taliban is a cross-border. It is a Pashtun thing. It is on both sides of the Durand line. We have in Pakistan there will be no overt American troops on the ground, as I think is probably a smart policy. But at the same time, and that makes this a civilian challenge in terms of the United States size. There are questions about the partnership. Is everyone committed to the same strategy, to the same goals? And then if the United States is actually has the right program for Pakistan, do we have the resources? I think, Imran, you were just saying that you met with Senator Kerry. Senator Kerry has this bill out there for $1.5 billion a year. Is that, if we had that, would that even help the situation? These are all questions that I think Imran has some very interesting answers to, and I'm looking forward to continuing our discussion from earlier. Let me introduce Imran Khan. He rose to prominence as a cricketer. He was captain of the Pakistani national team, and under his leadership, I believe you had historic victories over England, over India, and over the West Indies, if I'm correct. And his career as a cricketer went from 1971 to 1992. He founded Pakistan's only cancer hospital in 1992, and that is actually the reason why he's in the United States today, helping raise money for that eminent cause. I'm sure there are people here who would love to tell you more and more about that, if anyone is interested. He went into politics in the early 1990s, and he focused on a combination of Islamic values, liberal economics and deregulation, less bureaucracy, and anti-corruption. He's currently a member of the Pakistani Parliament, and he is chairman of the political party, the Movement for Justice Party. And with that, I think I would like to welcome Imran Khan to the table, and we'll have Imran speak for as long as he wants to speak, and then what we'll do is turn it over to Q&A. So, Imran, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And thanks for that cricketing introduction, which I notice a few of the Asians would have understood, but beating England, West Indies, and so on would not be. People in the U.S. would not be very conversant with it. Just briefly, the political party I formed 13 years back was called Movement for Justice, Tehreek-e-Insaf. Reason was very simple, because I think the third world is third world because they don't have rule of law. Because they don't have rule of law, they cannot have a genuine democratic system. Because if you have elections without having rule of law, you do not get democracy, genuine democracy. So most third world countries and most dictators do hold elections, but because there's not rule of law, you don't get democracy. So therefore, I was inspired by two things when I went as an 18-year-old to the United Kingdom. Two aspects impressed me about the system in the UK. One was rule of law, where people had rights. The independent justice system protected their rights. And secondly was the welfare state. So therefore my party was inspired by these two ideals. And so when we talk about movement for justice, it's not just judicial justice, but also economic justice. Now coming to the issue of how to defeat the Taliban. I'll try and not be too detailed in this, because I think your questions I would be much more interested, because there are various aspects to this Taliban issue. In my opinion, I have opposed this, the invasion of, bombing invasion of Afghanistan from day one. I opposed it because I thought the Taliban were not the terrorists. Terrorists were Al-Qaeda. And the fundamental mistake made in this, in the whole anger that existed, understandably, in the US in 9/11, that they did not differentiate between the two, and they actually pushed Taliban in the direction of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was already in Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda was Osama bin Laden landed in Pakistan in a CIA plane. He was as late as 89. A friend of mine met him in the US embassy in Islamabad. So Taliban only came into power in 96. And Taliban came into power as a reaction to the devastation of Afghanistan, and then the warlords fighting for power, where hundreds of thousands of people were killed. So in that rose the Taliban, who promised people rule of law. The most important aspect to understand about the Taliban movement is, in the West, sometimes they think that it's some ideology, radical Islam, that is about to take over Pakistan. Just now, before the Swat military operation, I read statements like, the Taliban are about to take over Pakistan, the nuclear arsenal was going to fall in their hands, and it was this ideology of Taliban that would take over the country. The reason why Taliban took over Afghanistan very easily was not because they promised some Islamic ideology. The reason was in war-torn Afghanistan, they promised rule of law, a semblance of law there. And that's why they quickly spread all over. And it's not, this thing, you hear that, it was this Islamic ideology that prevailed. Remember, Gulbuddin Hikmatyar, who was backed by the ISI, was considered an Islamic fundamentalist. So he wasn't exactly some secular guy who was defeated by the Taliban. So it was the rule of law which the people in Afghanistan yearned for that led to the success of Taliban. And it was actually the ideology that was eventually leading to their collapse. By 2001, the Taliban were already on the downhill. The anti-Taliban commanders, which met in Peshawar just a week probably before the bombing of Afghanistan, it was a very high-profile meeting. It would be sometime first week of October 2001, where they begged the Americans not to bomb the Taliban. In fact, there was a sort of a commander whose nickname was Hollywood Huck, who actually went into Afghanistan to try and destabilize. He thought he could actually whip up the popular feeling against the Taliban. But he was caught and killed. But the feeling amongst the anti-Taliban commanders were that Taliban were collapsing. And so the ideology of Taliban, people, after they had established the rule of law, people were already not accepting that brand of Islam. So in Pakistan, when they were in power from 1995 to 2001 in Afghanistan, there were no takers for the Taliban ideology. In the tribal belt, surely if it was so attractive, the whole tribal belt should have become Talibanized. There were no militant Taliban in Pakistan. Taliban, by the way, means religious students in madrasas. They call themselves Talibs. There are 2 million Taliban in Pakistan, in the sense that there are 2 million madrasa students in Pakistan. but there were no militant Taliban in Pakistan. And so it's a very important aspect you have to understand. The only place in Pakistan where the Taliban they resonated with the people was in Swat. Now, Swat, so this distinction between the Swat Taliban and the Taliban of the tribal area has to be understood, because only then will you understand what my conclusion is, that this is the wrong way we are dealing with this whole war on terror and dealing with the Taliban. Swat was a very peculiar situation, that it was run by, it was an independent state till 1969, when it was absorbed in Pakistan by, it became part of Pakistan. In 1974, the Pakistani laws were imposed on the people of Swat. Now, before that, Swat was run by a mixture. The laws there were a mixture of Shariat, because before the British came to India, India had Shariat law. The Mughals, and before that, there was basically Shariat, interpretation of different rulers' Shariat. And Swat was a mixture of Shariat and the local tribal customs. But it worked. The murder rate in Swat till 1974, on an average, was between 10 to 11 a year. When Pakistan civilized Swat by bringing its own laws there, in 3 years, the murder rate had gone from 10 to 11 to 700. And the system collapsed. They didn't have the lawyers, they didn't have the judges, they didn't have anyone to interpret the law. So the people in 1977, people in Swat, revolted against the Pakistani laws and demanded the old system back, which was based on Shariat. So when people of Swat wanted Shariat, it was basically the old justice system that existed before, which gave access to cheap and quick justice to the common man. So in 1977, the government then relented. The government had a mixer, half of the Pakistani laws and half of the old customs and the old Shariat law they brought in. Didn't work. 1990s, again, a movement started demanding the same Shariat back, this time under Sufi Muhammad, who formed this organization called the Tehreek-e-Nafaz-e-Shariat. They wanted to implement Shariat again. 1994, Benazir's government signed a deal with him. The same deal which was just now signed by the ANP government. This was more or less the same deal in 1994 was signed by the Benazir government. But the government sort of did window dressing. They just called the judges qazis and so on. So it didn't work. Again in 90, there was uprising, there was sort of trouble. 98, the Nawaz Sharif government then signed a similar sort of a deal about Shariat law. And then, of course, ANP recently. So Swat was, the genesis of the whole movement in Swat was basically about governance. It was about justice. It was about common people being deprived of justice. So when the movement started, it had a very small, a very high class content in it. It was the peasants who were sort of basically demanding this Shariat. And obviously, because the more powerful had, could afford lawyers and stuff, so they benefited, but the peasants were the ones. And so when this movement again started under Musharraf, and when General Musharraf sent the army in September 2007, and that's when they first called themselves Taliban. Until then, they were not calling themselves Taliban. They were saying, the restoration of Shariat. So that's when the army went in, army being the common enemy, they also then said, we've become part of-e-Taliban Pakistan. And this Tehreek-e-Taliban in Swat had the peasants joined this movement much more, and they attacked also the landlords who were the first ones to be displaced from there. So This should not be confused by the way the movement evolved, the Taliban movement evolved in the tribal areas. In tribal areas, in Waziristan, General Musharraf sent the army in February 2004. Now, before that, there were negotiations going on. Basically, the Musharraf government, under US pressure, was saying, hand us over these, the number is between 200 to 600 Al-Qaeda or foreigners who had come in after Tora Bora had entered Waziristan. So the demand was to hand them over to the government. The tribal code demanded that, you give anyone who's a guest, you give him hospitality. But in that agreement, which was about to be signed, and it was going to be signed on the 9th of February 2004, the tribal elders in Waziristan said, look, we will guarantee no fighters will go from Waziristan into Afghanistan, which was one of the demands. They said, but we will hand these people over to you, provided you give us proofs that these are terrorists. And agreement was about to be signed, and under US pressure, Musharraf sent the army in. And that was the beginning, when the army went in the next 2 years, in the beginning, the army was received with garlands. The tribal area, people, received the army as if they were their own. But gradually, as a combination of drone attacks, and I remember in September 2004, there was a drone attack that killed 70 people. And then there was a funeral the next day, another drone attack killed another 40 people. That was the beginning of change in Waziristan. The people, gradually, there was an uprising. The army, because the drones, the drones were considered to be, at that time, that the Pakistani government was involved, Pakistani army was involved with this somehow, so they attacked the Pakistan army. Pakistan army retaliated with less action on the ground, but through aerial bombardment. And in the next 2 years, through collateral damage, more and more people started rising against the Pakistan army. It took it was about end of 2005 that they started calling themselves, the new phenomena emerged, Pakistani Taliban. And before that, there was assassination of all maliks, the tribal elders, or the tribal elders through whom the government used to negotiate. Gradually, they were attacked. The tribal structure was destroyed. There was a vacuum, and in this vacuum then emerged the Tehreek-e-Taliban. So this Tehreek-e-Taliban then grew from strength to strength. The more the military action, the more the collateral damage, the more people joined this Pakistani Taliban. By 2006, end of 2006, the Pakistan army was losing so many men in Waziristan that they signed that famous Waziristan Accord, which was heavily criticized by the US government. And then, that accord finally broke again, hostilities resumed, but all the time the army would come to some sort of an understanding. The pressure from the US administration to do more, the Pakistan army, this feeling that it wasn't doing enough. There was the motivation in the Pakistan army to fight the Taliban, who were basically the people from the tribal area. There was not enough motivation. At one point, 250 soldiers surrendered to 10 Taliban. And so there was this feeling, the army was not owning it as its own war. They were feeling that they were fighting someone else's war. And gradually, in the whole 7 tribal agencies, the Tehreek-e-Taliban spread. Wherever the army action went, you saw the Taliban strength growing and the tribal structure being destroyed. Now, in the current situation, what should be done? What has happened and what should be done? The Tehreek-e-Taliban in Swat signed a deal with the ANP government, and when Musharraf went in the elections, all the political parties campaigned in the elections, saying that they would deal with this militancy in the tribal area through dialogue and not through military action. This is People's Party, ANP, which was ANP won the election on the slogan that they would stop the bloodshed of Pashtuns. That was their main slogan. So, and they would, through dialogue, solve their differences. So the election campaign, they pledged that they would not use military means but dialogue, because military means until now all it had done was increase militancy. So for 3 months after the elections, there was complete lull in the fighting, because there was waiting that what would now the government would. Taliban, in fact, some Waziristan Taliban announced that we are waiting for dialogue to follow. Then, under US pressure, the Zardari government launched the Bajaur operation. 500,000 refugees came out of Bajaur. There was a lot of, as a result, there were suicide attacks, Merit was bombed, and so we were back to the same Musharraf era, where there was when there was military action in the tribal area, casualties there, then they would take action in the cities in Pakistan. After the Swat operation started in September, when the civilian government, September 2007 under Musharraf, when the civilian government came in, there was dialogue. They stopped the military operation, and in this time there were negotiations going on with the ANP government and the Swat Taliban. Then they came to an agreement. This is about 3 months back. They came to some agreement with the Taliban in Swat, the ANP government, and Sufi Muhammad. For 2 months, the government did not do. Asif Zardari, who was supposed to sign the agreement as the president of Pakistan, would not sign the agreement because he was under he felt probably that here was a secular government, and here they were going to sign a Sharia law. So he sat on the agreement for 2 months. Things deteriorated in that meantime. Finally, the ANP government said that they would resign from government if that agreement was not signed. So he then took it to Parliament. The Parliament passed a resolution endorsing this Shariat law. Came under severe criticism in the Western countries and in the US. And then 10 days after that agreement, there were some of the Taliban went into Bunair, which was violating the agreement, and the army action started. Now, this army action, in my opinion, I severely criticize this army action, not because I thought what the Taliban were doing in Swat or endorsing what they were doing in Swat, because what they were doing in Swat, by the way, had even nothing to do with Islam. There's no religion. Islam allows you to blow up schools or girls' schools and so on, or this throat cutting which they were doing. Because these Taliban, there were 3 groups in Swat, and amongst these groups, criminals had joined them. Anyone could be a Taliban. The peasants, the poorer section of the society had joined them. And there was no central command, so they were robbing people, they were attacking people, they were losing rapidly support amongst the people of Swat. But I felt that the military action should have taken into consideration the people who were going to be saved from the Taliban, the people of Swat. So I criticized it because I thought that it should have been a counterinsurgency operation. I thought that they should have kept the dialogue going and isolated the real hardliners, because there was amongst the 3 groups. When we had the all-parties conference, the ANP told us that some of the groups wanted the peace agreement. There were hardliners who didn't want it. Split the Taliban movement and decapitate the leadership, because there were, as it has emerged, around 5,000 fighters. What I did not think should have been done was that the army should have gone in with artillery in civilian areas to flush out 5,000 people. They ended up causing the most massive refugee problem. Collateral damage, which still no one knows because they have sealed off the area. The press is not allowed there. And then the harvest was days away. Now, these are subsistence farmers. So they could have at least delayed or taken time, talked, to at least allow them to harvest their wheat crop. And then the fruit tree, the cash crops, which is the fruit orchards, they were about to be, another few weeks, and that's gone. So I thought they could have delayed till then. What was the hurry? But there was a whole atmosphere created. The Taliban were about to 60 miles from Islamabad, and they were about to take over Islamabad. These are 5,000 fighters. Pakistan has a standing army of 800,000 soldiers. How were these 5,000 people going to take over Islamabad? So this hype was created, I felt, to justify the military action. But in the end, we have, and I don't think anyone imagined that this is the sort of scale of crisis the country would be facing now. You have this 3 million refugees, their livelihood gone, their crops destroyed. How are they going to, even when they go back, how are they going to sustain themselves? We don't have a governance system to cope with this sort of refugee crisis. The military action was not followed, or there is no, at the moment, political backup, because the military can just clear up, but then there must be, a civilian infrastructure to take over. There's nothing in sight so far. So, in my opinion, this military operation is going to cause more problems for Pakistan. It's going to increase militancy. Already you can see in the camps, just before I came, I was in the camps. Already you can see resentment against the army far greater than it was against the Taliban. They didn't like the Taliban, but the army action has actually affected them, the majority of the people, much more. And now the Pakistan army is going into Waziristan. Now already there are, as I said, there are these huge number of internally displaced refugees. We go to Waziristan, there will be more refugees. Waziristan is completely different to Swat. The actual fighters are in Waziristan. They are not hated as much. The Taliban in Waziristan are not hated like the Taliban were hated by the people of Swat. Today there are about 30 Taliban groups, 8 major ones, 20 odd smaller ones. This for me is the military operations. Every military operation has increased militancy in Pakistan. Every military operation in our history has never ever achieved its objectives. Started from East Pakistan when the army went in, most of you might or might not know that it was a total disaster. The number of civilian casualties, rather than giving the people their rights, sending the army in, ended up breaking the country. The army operation in Balochistan by Musharraf, people again wanting their rights. Balochistan being treated like a colony, like East Pakistan, rather than giving them their rights, the army going in. Today that rights movement has turned into an independence movement. Then there was an operation in Karachi in 92. All it did was created more and more resentment and feeling of deprivation by people in Karachi who had formed the party to redress their feeling of neglect by the central government. So that operation, all it did was it increased the anger. And in fact, the 96 operation, which was a counterinsurgency operation, worked. So the Balochistan operation has failed. Waziristan operation has produced this phenomenon of Pakistani Taliban. Bajaur operation, which was done, the Taliban the moment the army stopped the operation, Taliban moved back into the area. All that was affected was the civilians. 500,000 refugees. There's still 200,000 refugees out of Bajaur. And there were other Sindh operation. Then there was a Lal Masjid operation. There was a mosque in Islamabad taken over by these fundamentalists. Rather than sort of, talking to them and taking them out of the mosque, which actually had been done by a politician of Musharraf, Chaudhry Shujat, who was the leader of the Q League, he had actually negotiated a safe conduct for these people in the Red Mosque, these fundamentalists. Musharraf ended up taking military action, bombing them, women, children, orphans killed in that. there were 60 suicide attacks after the Lal Masjid operation in Islamabad. And Swat actually flared up after that Lal Masjid operation. So military operations have not been successful. I have always felt that military operations, whether they have the US military operation in Afghanistan, I don't think that has achieved anything. I think that all it's doing is exacerbating the situation. I don't think any of the Pakistani military operations have achieved their objectives. What I think should be done right now because the mess has been created over a period of time, I think what needs to be done is talking to different groups, winning the tribal people over to your side, and actually isolating the real terrorists who were Al-Qaeda. No Pashtun has been involved in international terrorism. The only organization that has capability of hitting Western targets is Al-Qaeda. So Al-Qaeda should still be isolated. If Hamid Karzai today can talk about getting Mullah Umar across the table, if he can say that the Taliban are not terrorists now and Al-Qaeda are the terrorists, then surely the same thing should be done in Pakistan. I don't agree with this concept that each time there's a peace deal, they say the Taliban regroup. In fact, Taliban are helped by military operations, not by peacetime. Each time there's a military operation, the Taliban increase. Because what happens is military operation causes collateral damage. In the Pashtun genes, in their whole code of honor, revenge is part of their code of honor. I mean, they live by the whole society for thousands of years. The revenge has been a way of keeping peace in the society. It's like a balance of terror. That if you kill someone, you can be assured that their family members will come after you. So actually, the tribal area, which is reported sometimes as the lawless tribal areas, are actually there's complete law there. You'd be surprised that there's hardly any crime in the tribal areas. I mean, I'm not talking about now where there's a war situation going on, but there was in his book, The Pathans, written by Olaf Caro, who was the British governor of Frontier Province in 1935, he states that in a week there was more crime in Peshawar than in a year in the whole of the tribal belt. So this whole this revenge part of the code of honor keeps peace there. You can be sure that if someone is killed in a family, the family will come after. So this aerial bombardment is just adding to militancy in the tribal area. And remember, there are 1.5 million armed men in the tribal areas. So there's no shortage of, the more these military actions go, there will always be recruits coming up. And you're looking at a never-ending situation. This will just go on. And I have not yet come across either an American leader or a Pakistani, whether it's military or the current political leadership. No one can tell us right now what will they do to win this war. What are the actions they will take for this war to end? No one can tell us this. Because every action has only made things worse. And I again, I finish my talk and wait for your questions by saying that the Swat operation is a huge catastrophe. This, as it unfolds, I'm afraid I do not think we have the means in Pakistan to cope with this. And I also think that the anger that is going to, amongst the people of Swat, when they go back and find, their homes devastated and not having means to exist, we don't have as I said, the governance system even to utilize this aid. Already there are, every day you see small demonstrations in the camps or around the camps in Swabi and Mardan, all adjoining areas to Swat. We're saying we are not getting any aid or we are not getting any supplies. So, and then finally this Biden-Lugar bill about winning the hearts and minds by giving this money. My question is, how is this money going to be spent? I mean, how is this money going to be spent in the areas that are affected? And the main place where the hearts and minds need to be won are the tribal areas. People like us can't go into the tribal area who have a political party or who have goodwill there. How can aid workers go into the tribal area? How are they going to do any development there? So I don't understand. I mean, yes, it sounds good that, yes, you need to win over people, but you can only get development in and start winning hearts and minds once you have peace there. You've got to have some sort of a peace deal. Instead of saying that peace deals make them regroup, I think this has to be reviewed. The strategy, they have to be peace deals. They must start talking to these people, try and win them over to your side, and go after who are the real terrorists, who are Al-Qaeda, who are basically benefiting from this strategy.
Okay. Thank you. I think this is working now. Okay, great. Thank you, Imran. A lot to chew on. What I want to do is ask the crowd to really ask some questions, plumbing the issue of how we get to some of these peace deals. What's the process behind that? I'm going to let the crowd answer that, but that's where I would love to hear some more to talk about this. So I'm going to go all the way in the back. Tom, if you could state your name and any affiliation, and then your question.
Yeah, my name is Heather Malik. I'm a fellow at U.S. Joint Special Operations University, and I focus on U.S.-Pakistan security relationship. Thank you, Imran, for a very well-argued critique. I think the real question is, what would you do differently? If you could name your two top policy prescriptions, and I'm going to request you to be a little more specific. I've been hearing you for years about political reconciliation and winning hearts and minds. How would you do that? And a follow-up, how do you think the United States can help, or should it just completely stay away?
Great, thank you.
Now, so how do I, specifically you mean in Swat and tribal areas in Afghanistan? What do you mean? Are you, overall, what should be done?
Yeah, you've laid out what went wrong, and my question is, assume that you're in charge, and what would you do differently? And two top policy decisions that you would make right now. And you mentioned political reconciliation, you mentioned winning hearts and minds. How do you tie that down to some pragmatic policy initiatives? And then how do you think United States can help you? Or should it just completely stay away?
Well, I think the first thing the U.S. should do, and I've spoken to Senator Kerry and also to Gary Ackerman. I've spoken to him too. I feel that the first thing they have to do is get experts, people who understand the tribal areas of Pakistan, because that really is the center. That's the nerve center where everything is happening. You know, Swat is a mess, but it was mess created by us. This could have been dealt differently. It's not going to have any bearing on the overall Afghanistan-Pakistan situation. Swat does not have a border with Afghanistan. But the real problem is the tribal areas. And that's where the fighting force will be provided. Now, in my opinion, first of all, the U.S. must get informed opinion on that particular area. And unfortunately, they haven't a clue at the moment because the people they are talking to themselves don't know what is anything about the tribal area. Look, I'm no expert. I don't consider myself expert. But compared to the advice that is the U.S. is getting, I'm a triple PhD compared to them. I was with a federal minister arguing when the army went into Waziristan. I stood up in the National Assembly and argued that this is madness what you're doing. That all you have to do is read the 80-year interaction British had in Waziristan. You would never do something as moronic as that. Highest number of British soldiers died in Waziristan in the 200 Raj of India. So I said, the idea was to win these tribes over to your side and use them to get rid of Al-Qaeda. But the moment the Pashtun nationalism would have kicked in, which it has, the Taliban would have ceased to be Taliban. They would become Pashtuns. And so they would always have recruits, fighters going from this vast 1.5 million fighters in our tribal area. So first of all, they must get experts from that area, not the Pakistani politicians, not our prime minister, certainly not our president. They have no idea about this area. So experts, I mean, like General Orakzai. Now, General Orakzai comes from the Orakzai Agency. He was the governor of Northwest Frontier Province when these operations started. He did peace deals with the tribal people. He insisted that that's the only way to go is to do peace deals and win them over to your side. He actually had a meeting with George Bush and actually convinced George Bush that they have to change strategy in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, which he just said in a seminar recently, he said that was sabotaged. So if he could convince George Bush, I'm sure he can convince the current administration too. And you should get there 2 or 3 ambassadors from the tribal area who have been ambassadors in, like Rustam Shah Mamand from the Mamand Agency, Ayaz Wazir from Waziristan. These people should, first the administration here must understand that what is this fight all about and how to deal with these people and how to start peace talks with them. The whole tribal area has, for centuries, these are very good at peace deals because they are warrior people and they understand that once you get into a state of war, everyone loses. So therefore, they're very good at coming to peace agreements. And these people understand this. So therefore, in my opinion, what I would do in the tribal area, first of all, I would cease hostilities and win over different tribes to your side. Resurrect the tribal system again, because that's how the government deals with the tribal area. And through the tribal people, isolate the real militants. And use this money on the people of the tribal area once there is a peace deal. But as long as there are hostilities, neither can you use the money. Anyone who's perceived to be pro-government is killed. Recently, they won over these. They tried to split the tribes, something like what has been done in Iraq. They tried to split in Bajor. They got the armed local tribesmen, formed a Lashkar, and tried to corner the Taliban. And within 2 weeks, this Lashkar was wiped out. So it's not going to work as long as the current situation stays. And in Afghanistan, I'm afraid, there has to be an exit strategy because there won't be any peace in this area as long as the US NATO troops are there. And an excellent article written by Graham Fuller, the ex-CIA station chief in Kabul, in the International Herald Tribune, I thought was one of the best articles I read on the whole thing, which was written about 4 weeks back.
Okay, thanks. Up here, right in the front. Just wait for the microphone.
Yes, thank you for coming. I work for the permanent mission from Pakistan to the UN in New York. And
if you could state your name, too.
My name is Aruj Raja. My question is, how are you differentiating between the Pakistan Taliban and the Afghanistan Taliban and Al-Qaeda? Because at least from what I know, and I don't know much, it's that all 3 of these, individuals are blending in at times because of the geographical locale. So in your opinion, how are you differentiating between these, different elements?
I think the Pakistan Taliban are basically the tribal area, people of the tribal areas who became Taliban as a result of the army action. So that's in the Pakistan tribal belt. The Afghans are there are 15 million Pashtuns in Afghanistan. That's where the Afghan Taliban draw their strength. There are 25 million Pashtuns in Pakistan, but it's that 1.5 million armed men in the tribal areas is where the Pakistan Taliban is drawing his strength from. So, and Al-Qaeda are foreigners. So, throughout history of the tribal area, the people of the tribal area and the Pashtun tribes have actually always basically fought each other. But when a foreigner comes, they all get together. And so there's much greater chance of isolating Al-Qaeda than trying to split the tribes. So therefore, answer to your question is, everyone knows, in the tribal area, everyone knows a foreigner. Everyone knows everyone there. So they would know who the foreigners are. That's why the important thing is to win over the tribes to your side.
Okay, in the middle there. So.
Hello, good afternoon, Mr. Khan. I'm Bilal Baloch from the Transnational Crisis Project. I had more of a query than a question. It was in regard to what certain commentators are saying in Pakistan, your presence on TV with people such as Hamid Gul, and commentators are saying that perhaps you were even getting into bed with people such as Hamid Gul who were active in the Afghan war in the 79 to 89 in the creation of the Taliban, and saying, you know, that this is America's war and not Pakistan's war. Yet it seems to be a complete contrast for you here with an English audience and your views doing this talk in America, and I came to see you in the UK also. So my query was more, I mean, this complete contrast in views of what's being said in to a Urdu audience and to an English audience, and this complete contrast in Pakistan and here. I mean, is that born out of naivety, or is there some sort of purposeful change in view, or do you hold both opposing views at the same time, which would be quite duplicitous?
Bilal, I would really appreciate it if you could tell me one view, which, as I have told the Urdu audience, and which I would tell an audience here. Just tell me one view which is different.
It's more so the presence with on shows such as Geo News with Hamid Gul.
I have never been on a Geo News with Hamid Gul, although I would happily be on it. But it's just not factual that I have been on a Geo News with Hamid Gul.
I mean, commentators are saying that you guys are all but the same person. That's how much you are being seen at the same time. I mean, this is not so much my...
Is there something specific that he said that you could respond to?
Bilal, look, one comment, I challenge you, one comment that I would say to an audience here, different to the audience to Pakistan. I have from day one said, it's just unfactual to say this is Pakistan's war. This is not Pakistan's war. It never was our war. Look, the main difference is, if it is an ideological war, then yes, we can say that this is Pakistan's war because we'll have a Taliban takeover. So we have to fight these extremists. But if the causes of this war are political, which is occupation of Afghanistan, then the solutions lie in politics, not in some moderate Islam. The confusion you people are making, and unfortunately in our English medium educated westernized classes are making, is that they think this is some ideological war. They think there's some Taliban is likely to take over Pakistan. I challenge you that not even the illiterate people in Pakistan will ever accept Taliban ideology.
But I mean, 60 miles within Islamabad is much closer than from where they're actually originating from. I mean, yeah. It's pretty close. I mean, you may say that that's still not going to happen.
There's a Chinese proverb. There's a Chinese proverb, know your enemy. Who are these Taliban? First try and know them. And then 60 miles, even if 60 miles, okay, first of all, this is 60 miles as the crow flies. It's, if you go by road, it's a long way. Secondly, 5,000, just think about it. How can 5,000 militia take over a country which has 800,000 standing army, one of the biggest standing armies? How can it be possible? This was exactly the fear that was produced to make people follow your policies, exactly what Tony Blair did, that in 40 minutes London can be hit through weapons of mass destruction, to get people follow your policies. This was the old policy by Goebbels that scare people and then make them follow. Pakistan has never been threatened by Taliban. That can never be taken over by Taliban. But it can only be taken over if the ideology was accepted by people of Taliban. But as far as saying that this is our war, if this was our war, why weren't the Taliban in Pakistan before 2005 until we sent our army in? It was never our war. It's become our war, but the solution still lies in Afghanistan. As long as there are troops, and this is by the way what Graham Fuller says today, as long as in Afghanistan there's occupation, there's not going to be peace in this area.
Okay, thank you. Right here in the front.
Hi, Mr. Khan. I'm Adele Stan, and I blog for the Huffington Post. My question is about what you just spoke, about an exit strategy for Afghanistan for the U.S. military. There is a lot of concern among people who are not necessarily pro-war that a pullout would represent the abandonment of the Afghan people in the way that occurred after the war with the Soviets. And do you see a way to effect a military pullout without the perception and is there of that abandonment? And is there a way for the U.S. to participate constructively in the rebuilding of Afghanistan?
This is why I suggested there are people much more qualified than me who are experts, much better experts of the Afghan-Pakistan border area. And that's why I mentioned General Orakzai, who not only was the governor of the Northwest Frontier Province, but is from the tribal area, and also was the commander when the Pakistan Army went into Waziristan. And his and actually most people who are from that area, and this is having been in various seminars, all of them propose one thing, not an immediate withdrawal, but a gradual withdrawal. They talk about dialogue. They talk about getting everyone on the table. There was after this meeting with George Bush and General Musharraf and General Orakzai, there was a grand jirga, but they did not include the Taliban. You can't have what's the point of having like-minded people sit and talk about solutions unless you get the combatants everyone on the same table? But that will have to, my prediction is that will eventually have to happen. Eventually everyone will come on the table. Not Al-Qaeda, but Taliban, the warring Taliban and the government, various other people who will be the brokers in there who are trusted by both sides. They will sit on a table. It might even mean sort of a peacekeeping force acceptable from Muslim countries in between in the interim period. But that's the way to go about it. I'm saying that this needs to be discussed, but that is the way eventually of solving this issue in Afghanistan. And Pakistan and by the way, I was very impressed by this article, and I would suggest everyone read it. Graham Fuller, his analysis is very quick. He says the moment in Afghanistan there is peace and the occupation ends, Pakistan's security forces very quickly control this extremism.
Okay. In that, you just gave one of your more explicit prescriptions for how to move forward. And getting back to the kind of one of the earlier questions, how could the United States support what you just described?
The U.S. needs to think about this, getting everyone on the table in Afghanistan. And this would mean not just the Taliban in Afghanistan, but they are the real sort of people who need to be for peace in Afghanistan. But it would also mean Taliban from the tribal areas, various big groups to come on the table. And once that meeting takes place, and then it's not good. By the way, not for one moment do I think this is it's going to be a very easy solution. I think this will take time. I think it's a mess. There'll be several meetings, but I think this is the only option. I think that's the only, and the U.S. is in the position to do it. I mean, unless U.S. agrees, nothing can happen.
Okay. In the red shirt here, Tom. Again, if you could state your name and your organization.
Hi, Mr. Khan. My name is Sahar Khan. I work for the Washington Quarterly at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. My question has to do with the refugees. Pakistan now has a massive refugee problem because of the Swat operation. And just 2 weeks ago, violence broke out in Karachi and in other areas of Sindh, in which basically MQM and other and interior Sindhi parties have basically declared that they don't want the IDPs in Sindh. I was just curious as to why suddenly Sindh seems to have a beef with the IDPs. And if the IDPs don't go to stabler provinces such as Punjab and Sindh, then that only leaves Balochistan, which has a different set of problems. So what do you think about the situation? And also, why are Sindhi parties reacting in this way? Thank you.
Well, firstly, it's unconstitutional. They can't stop. It's against the Article 15 of the Constitution. You can't stop Pakistani nationals from going anywhere in Pakistan. So this is completely wrong, full stop. And the government should put its foot down. Secondly, this is creating ethnic tensions in Pakistan. because this in Karachi. By the way, Karachi is. I fear that could flare up any time because, what is happening is that the displaced people don't want to go into camps, and especially the Pashtun culture of privacy, women so they go to people they know, and Karachi is the biggest Pashtun city in the world with over 2 million people Pashtuns there, so they end up going to Karachi, and that's where the MQM perhaps feels that the balance will be tilted in Karachi with so many refugees coming in, and they no longer will have the monopoly and control of Karachi. Perhaps that's the reason, because they're already talking about Talibanization of Karachi even before the refugee problem. In fact, when the Waziristan operation took place in 2007 winter, 2006-07, when about thousands of refugees went to Karachi, already there was a worry from the MQM leadership that the Talibanization of Karachi is taking place, and he actually asked his followers to arm themselves. So it is potentially a very dangerous situation in Karachi. It flared up where 36 people were killed, and then I think the army stepped in, and so but there's an uneasy calm there. But in Punjab also wants to register these IDPs, but with the police system, which you would understand, given the situation, the corruption in the police. Imagine these poor refugees being at the mercy of the police. So them going there to be how do they tell the difference between in Punjab and Sindh between a Taliban and a Pashtun? So this is also causing resentment and anger in the Pashtuns.
Let me push back a little bit on this. I think what you've stated is that you don't believe that there's really a threat to the Pakistani state from the Taliban. And you say, look, 5,000 fighters in the Swat Valley is not an existential threat to Islamabad. Are there other threats, though, speaking about disruption in Karachi, that could maybe not threaten Islamabad, but could threaten the civilian government, and potentially, if you're saying that really the great defense of Islamabad is the fact that that Pakistan has this large military, that the military could come back into power and the civilian government could go away. What's your sense? Is there a perfect storm here that because of the various the mistakes that have been made so far, that there could be a threat to the civilian government in Islamabad?
Look, I don't. When I say that there's no threat of Talibanization, I mean that the Taliban ideology can never take over Pakistan. Simply, if you understand, firstly, as I said, there's no precedence in Muslim history of the sort of theocracy that Taliban brought in Afghanistan. There's no precedence.
Of course.
Secondly, Pakistan, I mean, their brand of Islam, I mean, the Taliban is basically Wahhabi and Deobandi, totally different to the Sindh and the majority province, Sindh and Punjab, which is Barelvi, which is more Sufi Islam. So it's just, and in any case, I mean, even the educated Deobandis would not sort of accept, what Taliban have to offer. But the danger is of anarchy. Right. Much more danger. I mean, what I see ahead is the state weakening in terms of more bomb blasts, anarchy, radicalization of the young, radicalization of the Pashtun. The madrasas, these 2 million madrasa students, who actually might start identifying with the Taliban. That's why I don't take the name of Taliban in Pakistan television. I call them extremists or terrorists. Because when you say Taliban, these 2 million madrasa students are all Taliban. So you actually also inadvertently pushing them in that direction. And the idea should be to isolate the real terrorists. But the danger is anarchy. And the fallout of the Swat, in my opinion, the fear is that in the frontier province particularly, it's heading towards anarchy.
Okay. In the red shirt on the other side. And I'll take some more questions. Who's right here?
Thank you
Go
for
ahead.
your presentation. Fariborz Fatemi from the Oxfordshire Group. I want you to comment about the Baluchis and the independence movement that seems to have picked up since there's been the problems in the tribal areas. And then within that independence group, bandit groups like Jandola who take advantage of that and are transporter with Iran and into Afghanistan and into Pakistan. Can you just say something about that and your views on it?
Well, the issue with Balochistan was that it's been treated like a colony by Pakistan. I mean, just to give you an idea, they produce from the biggest gas fields. The gas worth billions of dollars in the last 40 years has come into Pakistan, but it took 30 years from the time the gas was pumped all over Pakistan to go back to Balochistan. It was 30 years later it went to Balochistan, which was producing the gas, and that too went to the cantonment first. So there is a real sense of deprivation there. And then the National Finance Award, the federal award to the provinces, is based on population. Balochistan has 44% of the land mass, has only about 5% of the population. So they are condemned to poverty. Out of their, I think, 22 or 24 districts, 20 districts, the majority is below the poverty line. So they were quite right in demanding. And by the way, a fault not just lies with the center. The Balochi Sardari system also, the Sardars just take away all the resources. Nothing goes down to the people. So the way to deal with that was to actually help the people of Balochistan, by spending the resources from their mineral wealth on the people. And so when one Akbar Bukti demanded more, all the government used to do was bribe the Sardars. People never got the money. Anyway, and this operation that took place, once Akbar Bukti got killed, that's what sparked this movement from rights to independence. And it's actually a very serious issue in Pakistan right now. But because of the Swat operation, no one is talking about it. It's but Balochistan, remember, is 50% Baloch, 50% Pashtun. The Pashtun area is not demanding independence. It's the Baloch area which is going in that direction, and obviously those who are interested in destabilizing Pakistan can then play in Balochistan. The government is talking about the foreign hand coming in.
Okay, right here, the blue shirt, Tom.
Hi, my name is Pratap Chatterjee, and I'm a journalist and writer. Big fan of your introduction to reverse swing into cricket. But my question, I've traveled to Pakistan and to Afghanistan. My question is really about madrasas, because there's been a lot of talk actually about military action. You mentioned the 2 million Talib. And recently when I was in Afghanistan, I visited a very interesting experiment by Sheikh Mohseni. I don't know if you know him, where he's trying to introduce more moderate Sharia law and reform Sharia law in Afghanistan. I wonder, and I'm no expert in the madrasa system in Pakistan, but if you could speak a bit about that, because there's a great deal of fear in the United States about this madrasa system and how this 2 million Talib are about to create a huge movement. Is there opportunities there or movements there that will allow introduction of Islamic values that are moderate and in fact will be shared by most Pakistanis?
So for benefit of those who don't understand the education system of Pakistan, it's a 3-tier system. The top of the line, the elite private schools are English medium. They still have syllabus made at O-levels, A-levels come from outside. Then there were government schools, which until 1970 produced the best intellect of Pakistan came from government schools. But unfortunately, that government school system has collapsed. So in my constituency, which is fairly, on the border of frontier and Punjab and very close, as you said, 60 miles from Taliban, from Islamabad. Well, from my constituency, Waziristan is 30 miles. When I went around my constituency, people kept asking for wanting schools. So I did a survey in that area and found 70% of government schools closed because they didn't have teachers. Now, this is the sort of catastrophe in the state school structure, which has just collapsed. So the people then, and the madrasas is the biggest welfare school system in Pakistan. People give money, and so the madrasa system has come up. Now, when the British came to India and before they assumed full power in 1857, I read reports about, there's a great book written by William Dalrymple about the last Mughal. And in Delhi, he says that some of the top madrasas were of the same standard as Oxford and Cambridge. The madrasa's standard was much higher than the English Delhi College, which was there. So it gradually, the madrasas started going down because the endowments were taken and so on, and they were nationalized at the time by the British. Now the system is that the madrasas, there's some madrasas that actually do produce very good students. But most of the madrasas are basically giving education which has no relevance to people can't even get jobs, children coming out of it. What needs to be done in Pakistan is one syllabus for everyone. You need, most of all, education reforms. We need a system of education where the core syllabus is the same for everyone. But unfortunately, it can be only done by a government to reform the madrasas I'm talking about, which is not perceived to be stooges of United States. Because Musharraf was given about $200 million to reform the madrasas. He couldn't reform even one madrasa because he was perceived as an American stooge, anti-Islam by the madrasa. They thought this is a conspiracy against Islam. So the barriers went up and he didn't reform anything. But really, the side, what I want to point out is the US must never back individuals in our country, or for that matter in any country. They should just back the democratic process. They should not pick these people up just because they are going to follow their policies, because they then become hamstrung in the current situation. Their ability either to deal with the militants or to deal with badly needed reforms, education reforms, including madrasas in Pakistan, they can't do anything because they're perceived as, part of the war against Islam.
Great, thank you. We're having similar problems with picking winners in Iran at the same time. Okay, actually, up here first, Tom, and then we'll go back to the gentleman in the back.
Thank you, Mr. Khan, for your enlightening speech today. I have a question.
If you could identify yourself and your organization.
Zulekha Hussain with Al Jazeera. If Taliban are violating the agreements, like you mentioned in Bonaire, then what is the Pakistani government to do? Do they want, does the Taliban, do they want the Shariat law back in just the tribal areas, or do they want the Shariat law also in some of the cities in Pakistan?
In the tribal areas, there's no demand for Shariat. The tribal area is run by its own laws. As you might or might not know, only 40 laws of Pakistan apply in the tribal areas. Tribal areas became part of Pakistan in 1948 through a treaty signed with the founder of Pakistan. And so only 40 laws apply there. They run their own affairs. There's no demand of Shariat in the tribal area. This was specifically Swat, where when they meant Shariat, they meant their own system back, which was based in their mind on Shariat. A lot of statements came out, by the way, that the agreement had been violated because Sufi Muhammad had said he believed that he didn't believe in democracy, he didn't believe in Pakistan's constitution, and that was whipped up in Pakistani press. But Sufi Muhammad had been saying the same for 15 years. I mean, these are all the statements he made. When Benazir was signing an agreement, he still said that Shariat was democracy and the constitution were un-Islamic. He said that 15 years ago. Then Nawaz, when he made agreement, again he said it was So it wasn't anything new, he said. But that was also made. In my opinion, there was a case built to start the military operation. 10 days is too small a period for, from the time Parliament passes a resolution and accepts the agreement, and 10 days later you have a military operation. I'm afraid they should have exhausted other options. I still believe they should have isolated the real militants. They should have then done counterinsurgency, decapitated the leadership, but not anything but what they have done right now, which is a disaster.
Okay, gentleman in the back, and then we'll come up to Gary, and then we'll get a few more in.
Steve Landy, Manchester Trade, an economic trade firm, but have a couple of questions for you. Number one, my co-worker Stephen Fernando would correct your comment about cricketers because he said you are the cricketer of the subcontinent. He was very specific, and he's from Sri Lanka, so I want to add that on his side. Two questions. On the Hill now, there's a big discussion about something they call, horrible name, Reconstruction Opportunity Zones, ROZs, which is an attempt to set up textile plants and so on in the area. There's a little infrastructure involved. I heard what you said originally, saying maybe we need peace first before we start with these zones, but I would be interested as to whether this is worth much political capital. And secondly, I haven't heard you mention Dick Holbrooke's name. And for many of us in foreign policy, as you know, he probably would have been the Secretary of State if we had a woman president like you once had. But he's not Secretary of State, but he's in charge of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Are either of these things relevant to the current effort to bring stability to the region which you represent? Thank you.
Well, these industrial zones, it's a good idea, but as you also answered, that there has to be peace for them to actually go there. At the moment, there's no security. In Frontier Province today, the police system is collapsing because the Taliban specifically, the attacks have been on the police stations, similar to what is in Afghanistan and in Iraq. So when they target the police is at the moment trying to defend itself. Forget about it defending the citizens. I mean, in Peshawar and Taliban, as I said, who are these Taliban? Every criminal has now become a Taliban. Unemployed people are becoming Taliban. And they're extorting money from people. So there is no environment in the Frontier Province, which is the affected area, for at the moment to set up these zones. And that's why there has to be peace, dialogue, and then movement. It should be a 3 or 4 pronged attack. With winning them over, spending money not just on these zones, giving people stake in peace, and at the same time spending money on some of the tribes. As the British understood this, did it very skillfully. They used to actually spend a lot of money on the tribes to keep the roads free. So it can be done, but it cannot be done as long as there are military operations going on. As for Mr. Holbrooke, I would have commented if there was a change of strategy. It's the same strategy which is under George Bush. There's no change. And I blame our government for it because I think there was a great opportunity when Obama came along. Here was a man who did not have to own this tried and failed policy in Afghanistan. This aerial bombardment to fight terrorism is unheard of. Even when the British used to bombard, in the tribe, there are still pamphlets they used to drop, they are in the museums. They used to drop these pamphlets in the villages to say, tomorrow afternoon we are coming to bomb this village, so that everyone would leave the village and there was only material damage. They understood that if the moment there was collateral damage, there were blood feuds, these people will come after them. But in Afghanistan, the sort of policy, I thought there would be some sort of a change. Unfortunately, in Pakistan, in any case, there's even been an escalation of military activity rather than less. There have been more drone attacks. And I still don't know what these drone attacks have achieved. I don't know which leadership who they've killed, but I know the resentment and anger each drone attack causes in our country.
Okay, Gary Mitchell.
Thanks, Mr. Khan. Gary Mitchell from the Mitchell Report. This touches on at least one question you've been asked before, if not two, but perhaps coming from a different perspective. There is a feeling in this town that despite what's happening in North Korea and in Iran, that Pakistan is the most dangerous place in the world, that it's the most dangerous country in the world. It's a phrase you hear a lot in town. And that is for what seem to be the obvious reasons of a country with 170 million people, a nuclear arsenal, and a great deal of instability in governance. Two questions. One is that a fair and accurate perspective, or is that is that overreacting? And second, given that, if you could have 15 minutes in the Oval Office with the president, if that characterization is accurate, what would you say to him about the most effective things that he could do to lessen the tensions and to heighten the possibilities that Pakistan could become a more stable player, and the relationships with the United States could be where it ought to be?
Let me say, living in Pakistan, and this probably the most depressing time right now. Depressing because you don't see any strategy to get out of this. It's all more of the same. There's no, people put up with a lot of hardships provided they can see light at the end of the tunnel. But at the moment, there is no strategy, neither in Afghanistan nor in Pakistan, which gives us any hope that there won't be more of the same. And Pakistan, the danger is not nuclear weapons falling in any extremist hands, because no one in Pakistan feels this, because somehow the army is a very stable organization relative to everything else, the chaos that's going on. You always think that the army is stable, it has a control system. How long the army can sustain this also is by the way, another question, because the ground soldiers, people who are fighting on the ground, in Swat, because of what the Taliban were doing, there was a lot of anger and public feeling behind it. But the real fight is going to be in the tribal areas. How long will the army keep on fighting, which the common soldier does not believe it's their war? No matter what anyone says, whatever propaganda we use, people, the common people, and every opinion poll has shown, do not think this is their war. So how long the army can sustain it, that's one question. So, in my opinion, there will be a time when there will be some sort of, within the army, a reaction against this war on terror, the way it's being fought. But I do not think it's a danger that our nuclear program will fall into anyone's hand, because in Pakistan, there is a consensus about the nuclear program that it guarantees the safety of the country. It's very similar to Israel, which, the Israeli nuclear program, the feeling that it's surrounded by hostile neighbors or lots of them. In Pakistan, 7 times the size of, a neighbor, 3 wars fought. And since the nuclear program, there hasn't been any war. In fact, after the tension, after the terrorist attacks on Indian parliament, forces were on the border for 6 months. And a realization came, at least in the Pakistani public, that there is not any military solution between, whatever our issues have to be solved through dialogue. And that's when, we had this incredible sight, Pakistan losing in Pakistan against India, and people not burning the stadium down, which would have happened in my day. So this big change that happened, the public somehow decided that war is not an option, because I think that armies facing each other, 2 nuclear-armed countries, suddenly something changed. In my opinion, that was the watershed. The feeling is that, the nuclear is guaranteeing our protection. And this is across the board, whether you're, maybe not the, left, but majority of the population feels that way. So that's not the issue. The issue is that, the country could start moving towards radicalization the longer this war continues. The youth will get radicalized, the people, anarchy. The country might just financially collapse. This is a big fear. The nuclear is not the fear. The fear is that we could just go towards a situation where, the state would not be able to give any governance. As it is, the governance is going down. The light at the end of the tunnel, of course, in Pakistan is for leading the war on terror aside, is for the first time we have an independent judiciary, and actually won through by the people's power, and people stood behind an independent Chief Justice and had him reinstated twice, despite opposition from the status quo. And secondly, a very vibrant media. The media in Pakistan has revolutionized it. So therefore, what we feel is that as things deteriorate, we'll end up having an election. We don't think the army is going to come back in again. No one thinks, after Musharraf, people don't think the army is an option. So what we will move in will be election, which in my opinion could be historic. Because you will, for the first time, have an election conducted by an independent justice system. So you will have independent election commission. And first time you will have a media which will get everyone to come out with their manifestos and programs and solutions. So this politically aware public will make the right choices, and we will move towards a genuine democratic system and stability. So that's what we feel. As things deteriorate, we will actually end up having an election which will then pick us up again. But this fear of nuclear program falling in extremist hands, no one in Pakistan really thinks so. And for Oval Office, I would just say that, plan an exit strategy in Afghanistan and always back the democratic process. Don't back these individuals just because they are willing to say yes to everything you say, because they are, in the end, they are much more a liability for the US. You end up sort of having, they cause you more problems than they, by saying yes to everything than actually, I mean, what the US is spending, the sort of money it's spending, on this in Afghanistan and Pakistan now, if they had a proper backed, rather than not push those last elections, which I thought was a real mistake, they deliberately pushed Benazir and Musharraf together in what was supposed to be a liberal alliance. Then they got this ordinance through, which gave the entire political class this amnesty from their massive corruption cases, assassination cases, everything, just so that they could get this alliance together so that the same policies could be pursued. But what has happened in the end? There should be an assessment. It produced nothing. It just produced more chaos. The problems for the US have not been solved. It would have been much better that a genuine nationalistic people's government would have come up, would not have agreed with anything what the US said, but it would be far more effective in dealing with militancy or the madrasas or people or the radicalization.
Well, there's a story out there that when you first took over the Pakistan team, you were too shy to give them directions. I think you've come out of your shell. Imran, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you all for coming out. Please give a big warm welcome.
Thank you.